The glass shattered before Whitney Davis could even scream. It exploded against the pavement inches from her feet, showering her legs with glittering shards as a black luxury car screeched to a stop in front of her. Tires screamed. The smell of burning rubber filled the air. Whitney staggered back, heart slamming so hard she thought it might rip free from her chest. What the hell? The driver's door opened slowly, deliberately, like whoever stepped out wanted to be seen. Danny Hall. Even soaked in rain and shadow, she recognized him instantly. He straightened to his full height, rain sliding down the sharp lines of his tailored coat. Dark hair slicked back as if he hadn't just nearly run her over. His expression wasn't apologetic. It wasn't even surprised. It was intent. Whitney's pulse roared in her ears. Of all the streets in all the cities she could have been standing on, it had to be this one. It had to be him. "You shouldn't walk into traffic like that," Danny said calmly, as if he hadn't just shattered a bottle near her feet to get her attention. Her hands curled into fists. "You almost killed me." His gaze flicked to the glass scattered across the wet sidewalk, then back to her face. Slowly, his mouth curved. Not into a smile, but something colder, assessing. "You weren't paying attention," he said. "I was." That voice. Smooth, controlled. The same voice that had once whispered promises he never intended to keep. Whitney swallowed, forcing her legs not to shake. "Move your car." Danny didn't budge. Instead, his eyes tracked over her, her damp jacket, the worn sneakers, the tote bag clutched to her side like armor. His gaze lingered a beat too long, sharp with something unreadable. "So it's true," he murmured. "You did disappear." Anger surged, hot and sudden. "I didn't disappear. I left. You ran. I survived," she snapped. Rain hammered harder, drenching the silence between them. Cars passed, horns blaring, but it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of them again. Like it always did with Danny Hall. She stepped around him, heart pounding, but his hand shot out and closed around her wrist. Whitney froze. "Don't touch me," she said, every word trembling with fury. His grip wasn't tight. It didn't need to be. It was possession without force. "I've been looking for you," Danny said quietly. Fear curled low in her stomach. "That's not my problem." He leaned closer, rain dripping from his lashes, his voice dropping. "It is now." She yanked her hand free and took another step back. "Whatever you want, find someone else." Danny studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Get in." She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "You're insane." "I'm offering you a ride," he said evenly. "You're soaked. It's cold. And you live 3 miles from here." Her breath caught. "How do you know where I live?" "I know a lot of things," he replied. Whitney's skin prickled. This was why she'd left. Why she'd sworn never to let herself be this close to him again. Danny didn't just notice things, he collected them. Cataloged weaknesses. Stored leverage. "I'm not getting in your car," she said. Danny's gaze hardened. "You don't have many options." "I always have options," she shot back. "Do you?" His eyes flicked toward the street, then back to her. "You're broke. You're living with your grandmother. You quit your last job 2 weeks ago. And you still wake up from nightmares you pretend you don't have." Whitney's chest tightened. "Stop. You're drowning," he said calmly. "And I don't like unfinished business." She turned and walked away. He didn't follow. That was somehow worse. 2 hours later, Whitney sat at her grandmother's small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't touched. The rain had soaked through her clothes by the time she got home. Her shoes still sat by the door, muddy and ruined. Her heart hadn't slowed since. Danny Hall was back in her life. Her grandmother, Eleanor, moved quietly around the kitchen, pretending not to watch Whitney too closely. She'd learned to read the signs. The distant stare, the rigid posture, the way Whitney flinched at sounds that came too suddenly. "You see a ghost?" Eleanor asked gently. Whitney forced a smile. "Something like that." Eleanor set a plate of toast in front of her. "You don't have to tell me." Whitney nodded, grateful and aching all at once. She hated that she was here at 24, back in the house she'd grown up in. Her life reduced to borrowed space and second chances. She hated even more that Danny Hall knew it. Her phone buzzed. Once. She stared at it, pulse jumping. Then again. A message appeared on the screen. Unknown number. We need to talk. Her fingers trembled as she locked the phone and shoved it face down on the table. Eleanor watched her carefully. Who was that? No one, Whitney said too quickly. That night she barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw headlights, heard shattering glass, felt Danny's hand around her wrist, steady, controlled, unyielding. She remembered the first time she'd met him. She'd been waitressing at a private event she couldn't afford to attend. He'd been 25, already a tech billionaire, already untouchable. He'd smiled at her like she was interesting, like she mattered. He'd promised her everything, just not love. She hadn't understood what that meant until it was too late. The next morning, Danny Hall stood in a glass-walled boardroom overlooking the city, hands braced on the table as executives waited in uneasy silence. She won't answer my calls, he said. One of the men cleared his throat. Sir, with respect. Danny's gaze snapped to him. The man stopped breathing. I don't repeat myself, Danny said coldly. Find her. A woman across the table hesitated. We already have. She's living with her grandmother. No criminal record. No debt in her name. Danny straightened slowly. She will. The room shifted. Push the acquisition, Danny continued. Delay the press release. And cancel my trip. The woman blinked. Your London deal can wait, Danny said, because Whitney Davis couldn't. Whitney's phone buzzed again that afternoon while she was shelving books at the small local library. She'd taken the temporary job out of desperation. Quiet, low pay, minimal human interaction. She glanced at the screen. Danny Hall, dinner. Tonight. Her chest tightened. She typed back before she could stop herself. Whitney, no. The reply came instantly. Danny. That wasn't a request. Her hands shook. Whitney. Leave me alone. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Then, Danny, you owe me. Her stomach dropped. Whitney shoved the phone into her pocket, breathing hard. Memories clawed their way up. Contracts she hadn't understood. Promises she'd trusted. A final night that had ended with her crying in a cab while Danny took a call and never looked back. She'd rebuilt herself from that wreckage. She wouldn't let him tear her apart again. The library doors opened. Whitney looked up. Danny stood there. Silence rippled through the room as people instinctively sensed power walking in. He crossed the space between them with unhurried steps, eyes locked on her like she was the only thing that mattered, like he'd already decided something and the world would simply adjust. You're causing a scene, Whitney hissed as he stopped in front of her. I don't care, he replied. This is my job. You won't need it. Her heart pounded. I said no. Danny leaned closer, voice low enough that only she could hear. You don't get to say no to me anymore. Something in her snapped. Whitney stepped back, chin lifting. You don't own me. Danny's gaze flickered. Not with anger, but something darker. Something almost pleased. No, he said softly. But I will. She stared at him, breath caught, as the weight of those words settled over her like a sentence already passed. And for the first time since she'd rebuilt her life piece by piece, Whitney realized something terrifying. Danny Hall wasn't back by accident. He was back to finish what he started. Whitney quit the library job that same afternoon. She didn't bother arguing when the manager nervously explained that a very influential donor had expressed concerns about her fit. Whitney simply nodded, removed her name badge, and walked out with her dignity clenched tightly in her fists. Danny Hall had done this before. Erase her options, narrow her world, make himself the only door left open. By the time she reached her grandmother's house, a black sedan was already parked across the street. Her chest tightened. Eleanor was in the living room folding laundry when Whitney entered. You're home early. I lost the job, Whitney said quietly. Eleanor froze. Again. Whitney swallowed. It wasn't my fault. Eleanor's eyes softened. Come sit. Whitney sank onto the couch, hands twisting together. She debated telling her everything. About Danny, about the control, about the fear gnawing at her ribs. But before she could speak, a knock sounded at the door. 3 firm knocks. Eleanor frowned. Are you expecting someone? Whitney's blood ran cold.
No.
The knock came again. Whitney stood. I'll get it. She opened the door. Danny stood on the porch, immaculate as ever, holding a bouquet of white lilies like he belonged there. Eleanor appeared at Whitney's shoulder. Can I help you? Danny's expression softened instantly. Polite, charming, lethal. Danny Hall. I'm a friend of Whitney's. Whitney's jaw clenched. No, you're not. Danny glanced at her. We are. Eleanor studied him, sharp eyes missing nothing. Whitney hesitated. Just a fraction too long. That's enough, Eleanor said coolly. My granddaughter isn't interested. You should leave. Danny nodded once. Of course. He turned back to Whitney, voice dropping. Tomorrow. Then he placed the flowers on the porch and walked away like he'd already won. Whitney closed the door with shaking hands. Eleanor exhaled slowly. That man is dangerous. Whitney's throat burned. I know. The next morning, Whitney woke to the sound of her phone ringing nonstop. Unknown numbers. Emails. Missed calls. A message finally came through. Danny, meet me today. Noon. Hall Tower. Whitney stared at the screen. Whitney, I'm not coming. Danny. Then your grandmother's house will be foreclosed by Friday. Her vision blurred. Whitney, that's not possible. Danny, I bought the loan this morning. Whitney's breath came shallow. You can't do this, she whispered to no one. Her phone buzzed again. Danny, noon. She didn't tell Eleanor where she was going. Hall Tower loomed like a monument to power. Glass, steel, untouchable. Security waved her through without question. Every door opened before she reached it. Danny waited in his office, back to the windows, city sprawling beneath him. You look tired, he said. Whitney laughed bitterly. You threatened my grandmother. I protected my investment, Danny replied calmly. I'm not an investment. You were, he said. You still are. She crossed her arms. What do you want? Danny turned, hands in his pockets. Marriage. The word hit her like a slap. No, she said instantly. You'll sign a contract, he continued. 2 years. Public marriage. Private arrangement. I would rather sleep on the street. You'll have security, he said. Money. Stability. Your grandmother's house stays untouched. And you? Whitney asked. What do you get? Danny's eyes darkened. Control. Her stomach twisted. You promised me once you'd never cage me. And you promised you wouldn't leave, he shot back. Silence stretched. Whitney's voice dropped. You said you couldn't love me. Danny's jaw tightened. I said I wouldn't. Her hands trembled. You survived, he corrected. Because of me. She shook her head. I won't belong to you again. Danny leaned in, voice quiet and lethal. You already do. The wedding was announced 3 days later. The media erupted. A reclusive billionaire marrying an unknown young woman from nowhere. Speculation exploded. Photos of Whitney were dragged from obscurity and dissected online. She stood beside Danny at the press conference. Hand locked in his, smile practiced and hollow. A reporter shouted, Whitney, how did you meet? Danny answered before she could. Fate. Whitney felt the lie burn. That night, alone in the massive penthouse that didn't feel like a home, she stood by the window and watched the city lights shimmer like a trap. Danny entered quietly. You played your role well, he said. She didn't turn. I hate you. He stepped closer. You hate that you still feel something. She faced him. Don't touch me. I won't, he said. Unless you ask. She scoffed. I'll never ask. Danny's mouth curved slightly. We'll see. Days turned into weeks. The marriage was cold, controlled, publicly perfect. Privately, they circled each other like enemies forced into a truce. Whitney learned the rules quickly. No surprises. No defiance in public. No questions about his business. In return, Danny kept his distance, sleeping in another room, touching her only when cameras demanded it. Until one night after a gala when Danny came home drunk. Whitney was in the kitchen, barefoot, startled when he leaned against the counter across from her. "You're beautiful when you're angry," he murmured. "Go to bed," she said. He watched her, eyes glassy. "Do you know why I chose you?" She stiffened. "I don't care." "You didn't want me," he said. "Everyone else did." She laughed softly. "That's not true." "You saw me," he continued, and still walked away. His hand slammed the counter. "No one does that." Whitney met his gaze. "You hurt me." Danny's voice broke, just slightly. "You left." Silence hung heavy. Then he straightened, mask sliding back into place. "Good night, Whitney." He walked away. She sank into a chair, heart pounding. Something was changing. A month later, Whitney collapsed. One moment she was standing in the kitchen. The next the world tilted violently and went black. She woke in a hospital bed, Danny gripping her hand like a lifeline. "She's awake," he said hoarsely. The doctor explained dehydration, exhaustion, stress. Danny didn't leave her side. That night, when they were alone, he brushed her hair back gently. "Why didn't you tell me you were struggling?" She stared at the ceiling. "Because you don't care." "I do," he said quietly. She turned her head. "You said you couldn't love me." His jaw tightened. "I said I wouldn't." Tears slid silently down her temples. Danny closed his eyes. For the first time, control slipped. Danny didn't sleep that night. Whitney lay in the hospital bed beside him, breathing softly, and 4 taped to her arm. Every rise and fall of her chest felt like a warning. He sat rigid in the chair, jacket draped over the back, tie loosened but forgotten, eyes fixed on her face like if he looked away she might vanish. He told himself this was control, responsibility, damage management. It wasn't. It was fear. When dawn crept through the blinds, Whitney stirred. Her lashes fluttered. Then her eyes opened. She looked confused for a moment, then memory returned, and her body tensed instinctively. "You stayed," she said quietly. "Yes," Danny replied. She studied him as if seeing him clearly for the first time in a long while. "You didn't have to." "I know." Her fingers shifted against the sheets. "Why did you?" He didn't answer right away. Honesty hovered on the edge of his tongue, sharp and dangerous. "Because the thought of losing you terrifies me." Instead, he said, "Because it would look bad if my wife collapsed and I disappeared." Whitney's expression closed instantly. The fragile openness vanished like it had never existed. "There it is," she murmured. "The truth." Danny clenched his jaw. He'd chosen safety over sincerity. Again. When the doctor returned later that morning, Whitney was cleared to leave. Danny insisted on bringing her back to the penthouse himself. She didn't argue. She rarely did anymore. That scared him more than her anger ever had. The weeks that followed were different. Not softer, not kinder, but heavier. Danny found himself watching Whitney when she didn't know. How she stood at the window late at night. How she flinched when his phone rang. How she spoke less and less, retreating into herself like an animal conserving energy. She laughed less too. It unsettled him. At a charity dinner one evening, a donor leaned too close to Whitney, hand lingering on her back. Before Whitney could step away, Danny's hand closed over the man's wrist. "Touch her again," Danny said pleasantly, "and you'll never be invited anywhere I exist." The man paled and fled. Whitney stared at Danny. "I didn't need saving." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." Her gaze searched his face. "Why?" Danny hesitated. "Because you're mine." The words sounded wrong even to him. Whitney looked away. That night, Whitney knocked on Danny's bedroom door. He opened it, surprise flickering across his face. "I need to talk," she said. He stepped aside without a word. She stood in the center of the room, arms wrapped around herself. "I can't keep doing this." His chest tightened. "Doing what?" "Living like a ghost." she said. Married but alone. Watched but never seen. Danny said nothing. She swallowed. If this is all it will ever be, then end it. His pulse spiked. End what? This, she said. The contract. The marriage. Whatever this twisted thing is. You knew the terms, he said sharply. Yes, she replied. But I didn't know it would hollow me out. Her voice cracked. Danny felt it like a blow. You don't want me, she continued. You want control, ownership, proof that I didn't really escape you. That's not true, he snapped. Then tell me, Whitney said softly. What do you feel? The room seemed to shrink. Danny opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Whitney nodded slowly, pain flickering across her face. I thought so. She turned toward the door. Whitney, Danny said hoarsely. She paused. If you walk out, he said, you'll lose everything. She didn't look back. I already have. The door closed behind her. Danny stood frozen, heart hammering violently against his ribs. The next morning, Whitney packed a single bag. She didn't leave a note. She didn't need to. Danny found out within minutes. Find her, he ordered into the phone, voice tight. His security team scrambled. Calls were made. Cameras tracked. Nothing. Whitney Davis had vanished. Again. Rage flooded him, hot, consuming, familiar. He threw a glass against the wall, watched it shatter, chest heaving. She doesn't get to do this, he muttered. But beneath the anger was something else. Panic. Whitney stayed with a friend 2 cities away, a woman she barely knew but who asked no questions. She slept on a couch, stared at the ceiling, waited for the world to collapse. Didn't. Days passed. Then a week. No foreclosure notice arrived. No legal threats. No men in black suits dragging her back. Danny did nothing. That frightened her more than if he'd hunted her down. She tried to breathe, to feel free, but freedom felt unfamiliar, heavy, like something she hadn't earned. Her phone buzzed late one night. Danny, come home. She stared at the screen, heart racing. Whitney, there is no home. Danny, I'll change the terms. Her fingers trembled. Whitney, you can't change who you are. The reply came slower this time. Danny, maybe I can. She turned the phone off. Danny flew to New York the next day for a board meeting he barely heard. Numbers blurred. Voices faded. All he saw was Whitney's face as she turned away from him. He'd built empires by refusing weakness. But weakness had found him anyway. That night, he stood alone in his penthouse, staring at the city lights, and said the words out loud for the first time. I love her. The admission felt like a wound. Whitney returned a week later. Not because Danny demanded it, because Eleanor had fallen. Whitney rushed to the hospital, breathless and terrified. Eleanor was stable, minor stroke, doctor said, but fragile. Danny was there when Whitney arrived. He stood near the window, hands clasped tightly in front of him, expression grim. She stopped short when she saw him. What are you doing here? He turned slowly. I came when I heard. How did you hear? She asked. I listen, he said quietly. They stood in tense silence until Eleanor stirred. Whitney, Eleanor murmured. Whitney rushed to her side, tears spilling freely. I'm here, Grandma. Eleanor's gaze flicked to Danny. You, she said weakly. Don't hurt her again. Danny stepped forward. I won't. Whitney laughed bitterly. You already did. Danny met her eyes. Let me fix it. She shook her head. You don't know how. I can learn, he said. Eleanor squeezed Whitney's hand faintly. Let him try. Whitney closed her eyes. That was how it always happened. One more chance. They returned to the penthouse together, walking in silence. That night, Danny didn't sleep in his room. He lay on the couch outside Whitney's door, staring at the ceiling, listening for her breathing. Control had cost him everything. Love, he was beginning to understand, might cost him more. And he was running out of time. Whitney woke to the sound of something moving outside her bedroom door. She sat up instantly, heart racing, every muscle tight with instinct. For a moment she was back in the past, waiting for Danny to decide something about her without asking, bracing for control to snap shut again. Then she heard his breathing. Slow, uneven, human. She opened the door. Danny lay on the couch, fully dressed. One arm flung over his eyes like sleep had claimed him against his will. He looked different like this, less polished, less untouchable. A faint bruise darkened his knuckles, and she wondered what he'd hit this time. She closed the door quietly. Something in her chest twisted. Eleanor was discharged 2 days later. Danny arranged everything, private nurses, follow-ups, medications, without being asked. He didn't announce it. He just did it. Whitney noticed. She noticed when he canceled meetings to drive Eleanor to appointments himself. When he stood back during conversations instead of dominating them. When he asked before touching her arm. It made her uneasy. Change was dangerous. Change meant hope. And hope was how she'd been destroyed before. One evening, as rain streaked down the windows again, Whitney found Danny in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, staring blankly at a cutting board. "You're holding the knife wrong," she said before she could stop herself. He looked up, startled, then nodded. "I don't cook." "I know." She stepped closer, gently adjusted his grip, then stepped back just as quickly. The air between them felt charged, fragile. He watched her hands. "You don't flinch anymore." "I still do," she said quietly. "Just not always when you can see." That landed like a blow. "I'm trying," Danny said. Whitney met his eyes. "Trying isn't the same as changing." "I know." They stood there, two people circling something neither quite dared name. The first crack came a week later. Whitney was scrolling through her phone when a headline appeared. Hall Empire under investigation. Whistleblower alleges fraud. Her stomach dropped. She found Danny in his office, jacket off, tie discarded, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was sharp, controlled, lethal. "No," he said. "You don't leak anything. You hold." He ended the call and turned to her. She held up the phone. "Is it true?" He hesitated. That was enough. "Yes," she whispered. "It's not what it looks like," he said quickly. "It never is," she replied. Danny ran a hand through his hair. "Someone's trying to take me down. Or expose you," Whitney said. His jaw tightened. "This doesn't change anything." "It changes everything," she said. "This is the world you dragged me into." "I protected you," he snapped. "By lying," she shot back. Silence cracked between them. Danny exhaled slowly. "I never lied to you about who I was." "No," Whitney said. "You just never told me the whole truth." The pressure mounted fast. Board members turned cold. Investors panicked. The media sharpened its knives. Danny grew more restless, more distant. The old habits crept back in. Late nights, sharp orders, closed doors. Whitney felt the shift immediately. One night, she confronted him. "You're disappearing again," she said. "I'm handling it," he replied. "That's what you said before," she said. "Right before everything broke." Danny slammed his hand against the counter. "I don't have the luxury of falling apart." Whitney flinched despite herself. He saw it. The anger drained from his face, replaced by horror. "I didn't mean." "I know," she said, voice tight. "You never do." She turned away, tears burning. "Whitney," he said quietly. "Please." She stopped but didn't turn. "I can't be collateral damage again." "You won't be," he said. She shook her head. "You don't get to promise that." The investigation deepened. One of Danny's former partners was arrested. Another vanished. The word conspiracy began circulating. Danny came home one night with blood on his knuckles. "What happened?" Whitney asked, heart racing. "Nothing," he said. "Don't lie to me." He looked at her, something wild in his eyes. "I protected us." Her stomach churned. "From who?" "From people who would hurt you to get to me." Fear crept cold and sharp through her veins. "This isn't protection. It's escalation." "You think I don't know that?" he snapped. "You think I want this?" She took a step back. "I think this is who you are under pressure." that hurt him more than any accusation. Danny's voice dropped. "I would burn the world to keep you safe." Whitney whispered, "That's what scares me." The breaking point came on a night thick with sirens. Whitney was in the shower when the power cut out. Darkness swallowed the penthouse. Her heart slammed. She wrapped a towel around herself and stepped out, breath shallow. "Danny!" No answer. Then she heard it, voices. Heavy footsteps. A crash. Panic surged. She grabbed the nearest object, a lamp, and crept toward the hallway. The bedroom door burst open. Danny stood there, gun in his hand. She froze. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other. "Get back," he ordered. Her voice shook. "Put it down." "Whitney, listen to me." "I said put it down." Something flickered across his face. Conflict, fear, desperation. Sirens wailed closer. Danny lowered the gun slowly, setting it on the floor. Whitney's knees nearly buckled with relief. Red and blue lights flooded the room moments later. Police swarmed in. Questions exploded. Hands went up. Danny was arrested in his own home. As they led him away, he twisted back toward Whitney, eyes locked on hers. "I tried," he said. She swallowed hard. "I know." The trial was swift, brutal, public. Everything Danny had buried surfaced: illegal deals, threats, cover-ups. The empire crumbled. Whitney testified once. It nearly broke her. Danny never looked away from her on the stand. When the verdict came, guilty, Whitney felt both hollow and strangely numb. Danny was sentenced. As they let him out, he met her gaze one last time. "I love you," he said quietly. Her chest shattered. Whitney didn't visit him at first. Weeks passed. Then months. Eleanor recovered slowly. Life became small again. Manageable. Then one day a letter arrived. "Whitney, I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know something. You were never a cage to me." The black SUV had been idling for nearly 10 minutes before either of them noticed it. Whitney was the first to feel it. That prickle at the base of her spine. The instinct she'd learned the hard way. She glanced past Danny, eyes narrowing. "Danny," she said quietly. "That car." He followed her gaze. His body went still, all softness draining from his posture in a second. Prison had taken weight from him, dulled the sharp edges, but it hadn't erased instinct. "I thought it was over," he murmured. Whitney's pulse spiked. "Over what?" The SUV's door opened. A man stepped out. Then another. Danny's jaw tightened. "Get behind me." "No," Whitney said instantly. "Don't." But he was already moving, placing himself between her and the men approaching. One of them smiled. A thin, humorless curve. "Danny Hall," the man said. "You look smaller." Danny's voice was flat. "You should be in hiding." "So should you," the man replied. "But here we are." Whitney's heart slammed against her ribs. "Danny, who is this?" "Someone I couldn't finish dealing with," he said without looking back at her. The man's gaze slid to Whitney, slow and invasive. "So this is her." "Don't look at her," Danny snapped. The man chuckled. "You ruined a lot of lives, Hall. Prison doesn't balance that ledger." "I paid," Danny said. "I lost everything." The man stepped closer. "You didn't lose her." Whitney's breath hitched. Danny shifted, subtly angling his body to shield her. "This is between us." "It was," the man agreed, "until she became leverage." Whitney felt cold bloom in her chest. "Danny," his voice softened just for her. "Run." Before she could react, everything exploded. A gunshot cracked the air. People screamed. Someone shouted. Whitney staggered back as Danny jerked violently, a sharp gasp tearing from his throat. For a split second he stayed upright, eyes wide with shock. Then he collapsed. "Danny!" Whitney screamed. She dropped to her knees beside him, hands shaking as she pressed them against his chest. Blood soaked through her fingers, hot and terrifying. "No, no, no," she sobbed. "Stay with me, please." The men were already running. Sirens wailed in the distance, too far, too slow. Danny's breathing was ragged, shallow. His eyes searched her face, frantic and apologetic all at once. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Don't," she choked. "Don't you dare apologize." His hand found her wrist, weak but determined. "I never meant for this." Tears streamed down her face. "You're not leaving me. You can't." He smiled faintly. "I told you once. I'd burn the world to keep you safe." Her chest heaved. "I don't want that. I just want you." His eyes softened, something like peace settling there despite the pain. "That's the only thing I never knew how to deserve." Blood bubbled at his lips. Whitney pressed harder, panic clawing at her throat. "Help is coming," she lied desperately. "Just hold on." Danny shook his head, barely perceptible. "Listen to me." She bent closer, forehead pressed to his. "I love you," he said. "Not the way I tried to own you. Not the way I controlled you. The real way." Her sob broke free, raw and animal. "I love you too." A tear slid from the corner of his eye. "Then don't let this destroy you." His grip slackened. "Danny," she whispered. His eyes stayed open but unfocused. "No," she said, voice cracking apart. "No, no, no." Sirens screamed closer now. People crowded. Hands pulled her back. She fought them. "He's alive," she screamed. "He's alive." But she knew. She knew the moment his chest stilled beneath her palms. The news cycle devoured the story. Former billionaire CEO dies after prison release. Tragic end for disgraced tech tycoon. Love, revenge, and blood in broad daylight. Whitney didn't read any of it. She attended the funeral in silence, dressed in black, standing apart from the murmuring crowd. No family claimed him. No friends stepped forward. Only her. Eleanor held her hand tightly. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." Whitney nodded, hollow-eyed. Danny was buried without fanfare. Just a name carved into stone. Weeks passed. Life resumed around her, indifferent and loud. Whitney moved back fully into Eleanor's house. She slept. She ate. She existed. But something inside her had gone quiet. One evening, as she sorted through old mail, a thick envelope slid out from between bills. Her name was typed neatly on the front. Hands trembling, she opened it. Inside was a letter. "Whitney, if you're reading this, then I was right not to trust time. There are things I can't undo, lives I can't unbreak. But there is one thing I can give you freely. Everything I have left is yours." She shook her head, breath hitching. The letter continued. "I set it up before I went inside. Quietly, legally, no press, no spectacle. Just enough for you to never be trapped again." She closed her eyes as tears spilled freely. "Live the life I didn't know how to. Be free. Danny." The documents beneath the letter detailed it all. Properties sold, accounts transferred, assets liquidated. Clean. Irrevocable. Danny Hall's final act wasn't control. It was surrender. Whitney walked alone to the place where he died months later. The pavement had been scrubbed clean. No blood. No markers. Just ordinary concrete beneath her feet. She stood there for a long time. "I'm free," she whispered. The words echoed uselessly. Freedom had come too late. She turned away, tears blurring her vision, carrying love like a scar that would never fully heal. And as she walked on, alone, stronger, broken, one truth remained. He had promised her everything. And in the end, he gave it to her, at the cost of his life. Whitney didn't dream about Danny after that. That was the cruelest part. There were no soft echoes of his voice, no imagined second chances where things went differently. Sleep came heavy and blank, like her mind had sealed him away to survive. During the day, though, he was everywhere. In the way she flinched when engines idled too long. In the way her body still leaned toward empty doorways as if expecting him to appear. In the reflexive urge to tell someone about the smallest things. An odd cloud shape, a memory, a passing thought. Only to remember there was no one left to tell. Grief didn't arrive like a storm. It arrived like erosion. Whitney used the money exactly the way Danny said she should. Quietly, she paid off Eleanor's house and set up long-term care without spectacle. She donated large portions anonymously, to legal defense funds, to abuse survivors, to small libraries and shelters that would never trace the money back to Danny Hall. She didn't rebuild his empire. She dismantled it piece by piece and turned it into exits for other people. That felt right. Eleanor watched her closely. Worry etched deep into her face. "You don't have to be strong all the time," she told Whitney one evening. Whitney smiled faintly. "I know." But she didn't know how to be anything else anymore. A year passed. The world forgot Danny Hall. His name faded from headlines, replaced by newer scandals, shinier villains. Whitney learned how cruelly fast history moved on. She started volunteering at a legal clinic twice a week. She helped women file restraining orders, sat beside them in courtrooms, held hands when voices shook. Sometimes, she caught her reflection in the glass walls and barely recognized herself. Older somehow, steadier, carrying something heavy behind her eyes. One afternoon, a young woman looked at Whitney after a long hearing and asked quietly, "How did you get out?" Whitney hesitated. "I didn't," she said honestly. "I survived." On the second anniversary of Danny's death, Whitney went back to the prison. Not inside, just the road outside the gates, where everything had ended before it ever really began. Whitney stared at the screen until the words blurred. Her chest caved inward. Danny hadn't just died protecting her. He had planned his own death. Not directly, not violently, but knowingly. He had stepped into the open, knowing the past would follow. Knowing it would cost him his life. Knowing she would live. The realization hollowed her in a way grief never had. Love hadn't saved him. Love had destroyed him. For her. Whitney didn't tell Eleanor. She didn't tell anyone. Some truths were too heavy to share. She closed the file, deleted the backups, and locked the memory away where it would ache quietly instead of screaming. That night, she finally dreamed of him. Danny stood across a wide distance, not reaching for her, not pulling her close, just watching, calm and unafraid. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "I know," she replied. "You're free now." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I wish you were too." He smiled gently. "I am." She woke up crying. But for the first time, the tears didn't feel like they would drown her. Years later, Whitney Davis would be known quietly. Not as a billionaire's widow. Not as a tragedy. But as a woman who helped others escape storms she had survived herself. She never married. She loved deeply, carefully, with open eyes and unchained hands. And sometimes, when the city lights shimmered just right, she allowed herself to remember a man who promised everything except love. And gave it anyway, at the cost of his life. If the story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Urban Folks TV, and comment your thoughts below. Your support helps stories like this reach more people who need them. See you next time.